Joining me tonight on the News Hour is Professor Jeffrey Sachs, economist, author, professor at Columbia University. Many thanks, sir, for joining me and speaking to me here on Times Now once again. We heard what you said at the United Nations Security Council recently, condemning America's actions in Venezuela. But did it take you by surprise, specifically the brazenness with which the Trump government has acted?
Well, one of the points that I made in my Security Council briefing is that the U.S. has a pattern of regime change operations. So no, one shouldn't be shocked by this, even by the brazenness and the boasting. Remember the shock and awe of Iraq. Remember the bombing of Libya in 2011. Remember the U.S. plotting to overthrow the government of Viktor Yanukovych in 2014. Remember the president of Haiti, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, being walked out of his house by a U.S. ambassador to an unmarked, meaning CIA, plane that flew him to the Central African Republic. So there's a lot of brazenness in the U.S., but that doesn't mean complacency. This is alarming. It's alarming because it's a dangerous violation of international law. It's alarming because Trump is threatening at least half a dozen other countries right now with the war or takeovers or similar actions. We have a U.S. security state unleashed, let me say, by the President of the United States. Other presidents try to tone it down or they space out these regime change operations, but Trump seems to be pouring gasoline on the fire.
Professor Sachs, why do you think Trump did it? Was it oil? Was it expanding American influence in the region? Was it to use this action as leverage against other countries as well?
This operation goes back more than 20 years. And this is important to understand. Regime change operations often fail or there are repeated attempts. And in the case of Venezuela, back in the day of 2002 with George W. Bush Jr., there was an attempted coup against Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez, excuse me. And the CIA in one way or another was involved in that has never been explained. Chavez kept power in that case. In 2014, the U.S. was definitely implicated one way or another in unrest that was stoked on the streets of Venezuela. In 2015, Obama started putting on sanctions on Venezuela and tougher sanctions in 2016, declaring Venezuela a threat to U.S. national security. That's Obama. In 2017, very interestingly, Trump hosted a dinner with Latin American presidents on the margin of the UN General Assembly in September 2017 and said to those presidents then, 8 years ago, well, why don't I just invade Venezuela? So this is not something that has just come up. When you ask the motivations, there are several, but the main motivations are two. One is that Chavez and Maduro are left-wing populist politicians of the kind that the United States has repeatedly overthrown in Latin America. That goes back a century, by the way. Americans don't like left-wing, American deep state, I should say, the CIA and the security state don't like left-wing politicians. That's one reason. The second reason linked to that is oil. And oil has been a subtext of everything about Venezuela for decades in its relations with the United States. But after 2007, it was confirmed that Venezuela has vast, vast oil reserves in what's called the Orinoco Belt. Indeed, these reserves are so large that the U.S. estimates Venezuela's proved reserves to be larger than Saudi Arabia's proved reserves. Well, that has stoked a lot of greed in the U.S., and the greed permeates the oil sector, but obviously the oil sector pays money to the politicians, and it has permeated the deep state also, because the deep state wants a big reserve of oil for American purported national security. And so these are the two real issues that have been in play. But I want to just remind everybody that many of these operations take years or decades, because overthrowing a government while it's a U.S. addiction is not such a simple thing to do. And in the case of Venezuela, it was tried and tried again, and then they kidnapped a president a few days ago. And they haven't they haven't overthrown the government until this moment. They say the U.S. is in control, but the U.S. obviously is not in control.
Yes, the government is still there in Venezuela, if not the president. How do you expect things to turn out? Will there be a backlash against America's actions? Do you see support for the likes of Maria Corina Machado, someone Trump has backed in the past, the Nobel Peace Prize winner?
I don't believe that there will be a simple, stable regime change according to the U.S. dictation. U.S. efforts like this rarely succeed. If they actually change the regime or change the government, it's quite possible that Venezuela becomes ungovernable or is beset by various kinds of unrest or political assassinations. The idea that they kidnap the president and say we run the country and choose the next politician, this is a kind of fairy tale. It's not how things almost ever work when the U.S. tries such operations. Once in a while it happens, but rarely. And I would say, if you're trying to make guesses, anticipate a lot of instability and perhaps violence ahead in Venezuela.
Professor Sachs, like you said earlier, Trump has threatened several countries, Cuba, Colombia. Do you expect him to act on those threats beyond Venezuela now?
Yes, unfortunately, in one way or another. The United States has lots of instruments. It has the CIA in many places. It does covert operations. It has the capacity in many countries to stoke a lot of instability. With Cuba, incidentally, we have had sanctions on Cuba for 65 years. We've done everything to crush that economy. The UN General Assembly every year basically votes to call on the United States to lift these sanctions, which are illegal under international law. And the United States every year ignores the voice of the international community. But they're trying again. Trump says, well, the Cuban government's about to collapse, and they're going to certainly try to do that. The threats against Greenland are not incidental. Trump has his eye on landing some Marines and saying this is ours. And I don't think that it's impossible at all. So these threats are partly delusional bravado, but the U.S. has lots of instruments of destabilization that they have applied and are likely to continue to apply. It doesn't work. It doesn't lead to desirable results. It's grotesquely in violation of international law. The point of my testimony yesterday is that international law is not just a nice thing, like a sweet story you read to your children. It's what keeps us alive, because if we just have anarchy, we're going to have disaster. So honing to international law is not some naive, idealistic proposition of a professor. It is what makes it possible for us to escape the disaster of great power conflict. And so we better take all of this seriously. We better stand up and have the world say to the U.S. deep state, no, this is not acceptable. We are not going to go on this way. And I think that if the vast majority of the world says this, it makes a difference.
And what about Iran? He's threatened Iran as well.
Iran is the single most dangerous place on the planet right now. The reason is that the Israeli government, which is a rogue state led by war criminals, in my view, incidentally, absolutely is itching to attack Iran with the idea of regime change. Again, this is fantastical. Iran is a civilization, perhaps among the oldest in the world, at least 5,000 years old in pedigree. It is 10 times larger than Israel. It does not have nuclear weapons, as far as we know, but it has a lot of power, missiles, hypersonic missiles. But Israel is intent on bringing down the Iranian government. And when Netanyahu was with Donald Trump last week, they basically said, we're plotting this. And Trump has made threats, which are very typical, by the way, of deep state threats, that there's unrest in Iran right now because of the economic crisis. And if the government cracks down, we're ready to intervene to protect the protesters. This is very typical. Why is there such economic duress? Because the United States is deploying maximum sanctions, has been doing so year after year to crush the Iranian economy. And then the game is, well, if there are protests, that will bring down the regime. But if the protests don't bring down the regime, but bring down a crackdown, then we intervene because there's a crackdown. So this is all part of a standard narrative. But Iran is an extremely, extremely dangerous place for this kind of game, because it will bring in China and Russia and other regional powers directly. And it involves, of course, Israel with its nuclear weapons. And so I'm afraid of what might befall us if Israel has its way. And Israel is even more of a rogue state than Trump's administration.
If Trump has violated international law now, what's stopping others from doing the same? Xi Jinping has made his intentions clear about unifying Taiwan with China. Do you expect him to act on it, or will China exercise restraint?
I think that China will exercise restraint, and I believe that what is the most important response is that the BRICS countries, which constitute about half of the world's population and are the giants, so China and India and Russia, Brazil, South Africa, and the newer BRICS members should stand up and say, not only do we exercise restraint, we are the defenders of the multilateral system. We will defend the UN Charter against this instability and illegality emanating from the United States. You know, last year when Trump, again, illegally played the tariff war, it helped India and China get closer together to say, you know, we have other things than fighting each other. We have a very great amount of instability arising from the U.S., which is out to break the international economic trading system. I think the events of recent days, not only the attack on Venezuela, but also the threats to other countries should really bring the leadership of India and China and Russia and Brazil and South Africa and others together to say it is even more important for our role to defend multilateralism, to show not only restraint, but to show that we support the UN Charter. That would be in profoundly stabilizing event for the world. So I'm hoping, especially with India's presidency of the BRICS this year, that we have that kind of response.
You've repeatedly told your Indian friends that they should not aspire to ally with the United States, given America's historical record. Is that view now reinforced?
Well, I've been saying this for years to my Indian friends. Don't expect some kind of alliance where India replaces China and America's value chains, its international production systems and so forth, which, of course, a lot of Indians hope for. And because of the very strong community of Indian Americans, very professional, very successful leadership community in the United States, kind of expects it. But the fact of the matter is the United States is a petulant, unstable, violent, wannabe hegemon in a multipolar world. And it is stoking crises. And that is not the kind of partner one wants. India shouldn't be against the United States, but alliance? No, it makes no sense. And I've said for a long time, the whole idea of the Quad, for example, an informal alliance of the United States, India, Japan, and Australia, ostensibly to oppose China. Don't do it. This is just American-style provocation, and America is not stable enough, responsible enough right now, and led even in a constitutional manner to be a partner in such a venture. It's just provocation, not anything which could actually bring security to this region. So this is the lesson of a president of the United States that is making threats everywhere, that is on a unilateral mission to bring down the international trading system. The United States bombed 7 countries last year, not one of which was under a UN mandate. I can assure you of that. And so be careful. India is a great power, and it should not make an alliance with an unstable, and I would say rogue country that is grossly violating international norms and international law.
Since you've spoken about the actions of the American deep state, should India also be worried about the deep state given what's been happening in its own neighborhood?
Well, the deep state does all sorts of sordid things. I have no particular view about anything vis-a-vis India, but let me say I personally believe that the United States helped to bring down Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, whom I regarded as a very talented and important politician for Pakistan. And the United States was not amiss in playing deeply inside Pakistan's politics. So I have basically had the view for a very long time, and I'm afraid that events go in this direction, that the U.S. is not a constitutional order. It is in the hands of a small number of players. It happens to be in the hands of tremendous irresponsibility right now. And I would say to everybody, defend the international system under the UN Charter and be careful.
It's always a pleasure speaking with you, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Thank you very much for joining me here on Times Now.